Hello and welcome to an introduction to portfolio management. The webinar this afternoon is delivered on behalf of the Portfolio Management SIG by myself, Petula Allison, as co-chair of the SIG, and Adam Skinner, my lovely co-chair. Without further ado, let's start with the session, and I would like to just introduce myself, a little bit about me, what got me into projects and portfolio management and what really drives me. So my background and history, I became interested in change a number of years ago, working in the public sector, really wanting to understand how change worked. I was in frontline and really wanted to understand what happened, how did projects happen, how did the change happen in the front line. And that's what drove and gained me interest, to the point where one of the biggest programs, biggest achievements was working on a major transformational project, circa 1.9 billion. It sounds massive, it's normal in the public sector. Being qualified and being a Prince professional is something that was big on my agenda at a point in time, and I think really keeps me interested in things in terms of the profession and being part of the APM and really wanting to share the experience and skills. On the other side of things, yes, I do have life outside of portfolio management, the APM, and yes, even lockdown in the current times. So not surprising, I love Bake Off, who doesn't? I love Formula One, I love the speed. What you wouldn't know about me, certainly from being on a webinar, is I'm actually Australian by birth. All these different things, all these different aspects and interests are what drive me and make me who I am. I really care about making a difference and being part of the organisation that I work in. When I moved from the public sector into the financial services sector, I really wanted to work in an organisation that cared about what it did and the services it provided to customers. So that was sort of built within me. And that led me to work and look after a portfolio at the moment for the Yorkshire Building Society. So one of the things that attracted me to the YBS was, again, the culture, the desire to provide a quality service to its customers, and essentially its neutrality. So a bit about YBS and where I work. So it is one of the top 3 building societies in the country, so it's not for profit, it works for its members. It's been established since 1864, and it isn't what I would call an old school building society, so it focuses on savings and mortgages as its main product offering. Like most organisations, it's gone through a lot of financial challenges over the years, but it has certainly been a stable organisation to be a part of. And it's seen its fair part of transformation. You'll see on the right-hand side, there's a number of brands that are called out there. And that's where I've been able to add value and support the organisation in achieving its strategic goals and ambitions through managing the portfolio. So it's gone through a series of acquisitions of different brands, Norwich and Peterborough, the Chelsea Building Society, part of the Egg brand. And all of that has built up its offering. And that's where I call home, and it's a place where I love to work. And it's certainly given me a lot of breadth of experience in terms of change management, project management and portfolio management, as it tries to do the best it can for its customers and stay on track with all the things that are happening in the current climate, be it, you know, financial challenges, be it digitisation, be it new ways of working and how we can be more agile or bimodal. So that's it from me. Over to Adam. would you like to introduce yourself?
Thanks, Petula, and I didn't know you were born in Australia. That's a useful little tidbit I've written down. My name's Adam Skinner. Hi, thanks for joining us this afternoon. I've had a career that spans the public sector and more recently consulting, and I'm currently director of consulting for an organisation called P2. We do a range of transformational stuff. Across my career, I've really been very focused on change and transformation, both in the program management office space, so the delivery of large-scale programs, but also what's probably my first love, portfolio management. And we're obviously going to talk a lot about portfolio management, but for me, the thing I find so exciting about portfolio management is, firstly, it's that wonderful link between the strategy of the organization and the delivery, and actually how you harness those two things together is always fascinating. And secondly, and we'll dig into this a bit later, just how very different portfolio management is to the different organizations, given it is so very dependent on the strategy and the culture of that organization. I think it's fair to say I've never walked into two organizations that do exactly the same things around portfolio management. So I think that's fair to say there's no absolute right answer, but there are plenty of wrong answers. As I say, we'll talk a bit about that later. So as Petula mentioned, I'm co-chair of the APM's Portfolio Management Committee and co-author of the APM's Guide to Portfolio Management, which we'll talk a little bit about at the end of the session. We're going to talk about for about 40 minutes or so now and dig into a range of things, initially looking at the why of portfolio management. Why would one do some portfolio management? Then we'll look at the what actually makes up portfolio management, and then we'll finish with a dig into a number of different hows. How can you do portfolio management at your organization? And then we'll have a few minutes to looking at the portfolio management SIG. We are going to try and answer questions as we go through as best we can, but if we don't, of course, we will get back to you soon after. So without further ado, very quickly, there's me, P2 Consulting, transformation organization, delivering transformation over the last 7 years. Do give us a shout if you've got any challenges. Right, on to the interesting stuff. So why portfolio management? Portfolio managers are actually quite a modern concept. The concept of sort of project and program management goes back kind of many years, and you can go back to antiquity, and there's discussions of building and essentially what we consider projects in these days. But portfolio management is actually relatively recent. I like to think of the start of project and program management in its modern form as being about 70 years ago, so probably with World War II and some of the work that occurs around sort of the engineering and the military project management that you see spanning out of that area. But project management have a very specific goal, and they're trying to do something that I like to think of as doing the thing right. I've been asked to deliver gadget A. I am going to deliver gadget A. I've delivered that project successfully. And that is what I consider project and program management. And that's absolutely great. And if gadget A is what you want, then actually you're in a really strong place. But about 25 years ago, people started to ask the question, well, actually, is gadget A essentially what we need? What if gadget A is not actually what our organization needs? And coming out of that came the concept of doing the right thing, which actually I like to think of as just selecting the best project. And that, in a nutshell, is where portfolio management came from. And there's some very simple numbers that you could put around this. So, for instance, if I spend £100 delivering gadget A and I deliver £75 worth of gadget A, I've probably got about a 75% success rate of doing the thing right, actually delivering my project successfully. And you know what? At this point, when I do this, I usually look for a show of hands of how many people think they kind of get 75% value out of their project management. It's usually not quite that. But quite frankly, if you're sitting there and saying, well, actually, we get about £75 worth of gizmos from every £100 of gizmo I'm setting out to deliver, you're probably in a relatively decent place. But of course, if you look at it from a slightly different angle, you say to yourself, well, does the organization actually want gizmo A? What if the organization only gets 75% value from each gizmo A? And if that's the case, you've got a real problem, because then for every single £100 we spend, you're only actually getting 50% value out of that £100. A classic example of this is I do quite a lot of retail work, and actually if you look into the retail space at the moment, there's all sorts of builds of new websites, because people of course trying to move online very, very heavily. So you could say, well, actually what we need to focus on is a really whizzy website that's like really kind of impressive, and actually you can actually have your project and program management people build you a wonderful website. But actually if that website's pointed at, I don't know, Antarctica, and actually all your sales are from China, you could get all the value from your actual project and program management work, but actually the value you're getting from the strategic alignment is very, very low. So in an absolute nutshell, portfolio management is about trying to make sure you and your organization are doing the right thing with your transformation spend. Petula, was there anything else you wanted to bring into that?
Yeah, I think that's absolutely key. Making sure you are aligning back to the strategic priorities keeps you on track and gives laser focus to where the spend happens. Not always easy in practice and often gets challenged, as we'll probably come on to when you've got other business as usual projects or a portfolio to run alongside.
Yeah, spot on, spot on. So if that's the why of portfolio management, and as I say, that's quite a recent why, because actually it was only in 2011 that management of portfolios, the OGC concept was, the OGC book was published. If that's the why of portfolio management, then what is the what of it? What makes up the activity that we call portfolio management? Well, I always think of that as really falling into two spaces, and I find the definitions as a really, really helpful way of exploring those. So if you'll humor me for a second, if you look at the program management definition, program management is the action of coordinating, organizing, directing and implementing the temporary flexible organization that consists of a dossier of projects and transformational activities to achieve outcomes and realize benefits of strategic importance to the business. A lot of really useful stuff in there. If you look at the portfolio management definition, and there are a lot of these actually, we tend to use obviously the APM's Book of Knowledge definition for obvious reasons. But the portfolio management definition that sits in there says the portfolio management is the selection, prioritization and control of an organization's projects and programs. So finding them, prioritizing them and making sure they're under control. But making sure that's occurring in line with the strategic objectives of the organization and the organization's capacity to deliver. The goal is to balance change initiatives and business as usual while optimizing return on investment. This is a continuous process to achieve the evolving strategy of the organization. You see, that last sentence is actually quite a new addition, the point being that this is obviously, the strategy is obviously an evolving thing. As such, you must be very comfortable that that portfolio management itself is evolving. There's a lot of words there. What I quite like to do though is to look at the similarities between those two statements. And then we'll look at the differences. So classic similarities here. Obviously, with both these worlds, there's an awful lot of coordination and control going on. And you're never going to get away from that. It's just change management is often about coordination and control. Projects. So there's something here about the temporary organizations that organizations are trying to deliver to change their business as usual. And strategic objectives, so both the program and the portfolio management refer to the strategic objectives. So we're looking to coordinate and control something in the project world aligned to the strategic objectives of the organization. So far, programs and portfolio management seem quite similar. However, there's some really important differences that really underpin what you need to do at the portfolio level. So if we look at those differences, portfolio management makes a massive, massive play for selection and prioritization. If you remember the why slide, it's all about doing the right thing, and that essentially comes down to selecting and prioritizing what those things are. There's no getting away from that. There's a whole industry and actually trying to do that properly. We talk about balancing change initiatives and business as usual while optimizing return of investments. So it's never just about picking the most important thing to deliver. It's always about a balancing of knowing what is the right thing to do within the confines of our organization and within the confines of business as usual. hugely important to be always thinking about what needs to land for the business to make its money, to deliver its value, but also what is the business geared up to receive. And that's quite a modern aspect of portfolio management, but more and more it's becoming very clear that the most important thing when you worry about portfolio management is to understand what the business is geared up to receive, ingest, and take value from. And the final thing I was going to bring out here is around that continuous process versus the temporary flexible. Because one of the very interesting things I think about the difference between the program management and the portfolio management world is the program management and project management is by definition a temporary organization. If I'm building a program, I am building a temporary organization. However, if I'm building a portfolio, it sits at the nexus between the temporary change activity and the permanent organization. I don't mean permanent here in the sense that actually when you set up an organization like HMRC or like Yorkshire Building Society, the idea is that it's supposed to be a permanent thing. So there's something very interesting here about how the temporary projects and programs hook into the permanent portfolio and organizational level that's driven usually by the financial annual cycle. So if we look at those, we got these three differences which we like to draw attention to. There's something very important about selection and prioritization. There's something very important about balance and optimization. And optimization for me is not just about saying what the most important thing to do is. Optimization about adding in the fact that actually you can't always just do the most important thing. Sometimes you have to go for the thing you have the resource to do. Sometimes you have to go for the thing that you have the money to do. So optimization is really about balancing that out. And this really interesting concept of permanent versus temporary, because often that's the thing that drives for me the most conflict between the change world, where they just want to get on and deliver these projects and programs that are going to last a certain amount of time, and the organizational world, which wants to carve stuff up into financial chunks of time that align with the organizational strategy and 9 times out of 10 the organizational's financial cycle. Petula, was there anything else you wanted to bring out at that point?
No, I think the comparison between program management and portfolio management is really crucial and key, and it's a question that comes up multiple times in terms of both as a practitioner and representing the SIG, that those differences are there, and that makes it really loud and clear. I think the important thing is the iteration and the alignment to strategy. As you said, organisations don't stand still, and they should be constantly looking at and reviewing the business case and the business priorities, driven by whatever internal or external influences are impacting or driving the organisation. And obviously you need to keep reassessing that value, the overall business case within the organisation's resources and constraints.
Absolutely. And what cycle do you work on there out of interest, Petula?
Yeah, so we align, like many organisations, to the financial planning cycle so that we're clear on what the spend commitment actually is. And we check and balance on that on a very regular basis, on a quarterly basis, to see what that progress actually is on the finances. But obviously we have good governance in place to ensure that we're keeping a track of drivers and priorities and those influences to whether things are still on track, the health of the projects within the portfolio.
Oh, that's brilliant, and that brings us very nicely onto the next slide. So if this slide is really about some high-level definitions, what does that mean practically? What does that mean pragmatically when you're landing and trying to build yourself a portfolio space? Well, I like to think of the world of portfolio management in really 2 boxes. There's a chunk of stuff which is around this concept of prioritization and optimization. And really, if I can revisit that very quickly, because it's absolutely fundamental, for me, prioritization is about balancing out the cost against the benefits of doing different change projects. And optimization is actually when you bring in the concept of risk in there. So for me, cost versus value would be saying, what is the most valuable project I can do for the least cost? And that's very much what people would have done if you jump back 5-7 years in the world of portfolio management. Nowadays, we like to bring in the angle of risk, because actually it's all well and good saying this is the highest value with the lowest cost, but actually if it's only got a 5% chance of delivery, you don't want to be going anywhere near that. Now that actually makes things a lot more complicated as you bring in that third variable, that third dynamic, but it really is incredibly important to be able to do, as I say, the optimization discussion, which is balancing cost and risk against your value. And here we've got a sort of image that talks about what you're trying to do in that portfolio management, about prioritization and optimization. As I say, on the one side, you've got cost, risk, and achievability. On the other side, you've got what's the strategic goal of the organization, what is value, and what is benefits. Let me talk for a few seconds about value and strategic goals, because it is a really interesting concept. What does an organization consider value? And often that's not something that really is really considered a role of the project or the program manager, although of course in slightly more modern days when we look at agile and some of those more interesting agile concepts, they are expected to have a very clear position on that. But a really good question, a really important place to start when any portfolio activity is to sit down and force individuals to answer the question, what does value mean for this organization? Because the better a definition you have of value, and the better you have a definition you can attach metrics to, the better chance you have of creating a proper and sensibly optimized portfolio. The risk and the achievability can almost always come from discussions with the projects and the program managers who are actually doing the doing. The question of value can almost only ever come from the C-suite downwards. So actually it's really important to feel comfortable having that conversation and trying to understand what you consider value in your organization. So here we have the classic portfolio management office shells, cost, risk, achievability on one side, value, benefits and goals on the other side. And we use that to juxtapose against what you might be doing in the program management office, where of course you still are obsessed about cost, risk and achievability. But actually value here is always about achieving the program outcomes. 9 times out of 10, you will have been told what those outcomes are by someone at the portfolio level or someone at the C-suite level defining as a sponsor what they consider value to be. So one really important thing you should be doing in the portfolio management office is this concept of prioritizing, optimizing, building the optimized portfolio to deliver. The other half of the equation, and again, this is a reasonably modern concept, but I can call something I always call portfolio delivery assurance. So if one half of the job is about saying what is the right optimized portfolio, more and more these days, the other half of the job is saying, okay, this is the optimized portfolio I have to deliver. What am I doing at the portfolio level to help reduce the risk of delivery? Or, put another way, increase the chance of successful delivery. Now, what you're trying to do here is absolutely not replace the roles of the project or the program manager, but there are some things that you can only fundamentally see at the portfolio level. Classic one of those is dependencies. So my ability to look down into my portfolio of projects, look at the dependencies between those and advise the projects and the program managers on the classic dependencies, challenges they might be hitting. Those aren't always just about dependencies between projects. 9 times out of 10, the really scary ones tend to be about dependencies for resources such as testing facilities or resourcing such as the business. So actually, is the business able to ingest the change you're doing? And it's often only at the portfolio level that you can clearly see which bits of the business are going to be swamped by the change coming towards it, because it's only at the portfolio level that you can look across all these dependencies. Other classic stuff you'd want to be doing is looking at your roadmap and your timescales. I like to think that it's the best place to look at your capacity and capability. So actually the overarching resource needs of the organization should be looked at the portfolio level. And finally, of course, change maturity. How good are we as an organization at managing change? Again, it's a classic role at the portfolio level to look down into the portfolio and work out where we have strong areas of change and where we have weak areas of change. So as I say, that second really important activity, and it's quite a new one, but second really important activity for the portfolio, delivery assurance, activity that reduces the delivery risk of the portfolio. Petula, out of interest, would you say that you put more effort on the optimization side or more effort on the assurance side?
Is that a trick question? I think, given the complexity, that you can't take your eyes off any of those potential balls. So, you know, you can't deliver your plan and the value without managing those delivery risks and understanding those in what you're doing. But I mean, those are a great set of tools or a toolkit to have in your bag at the portfolio level. And there's lots more out there. And in the current climate, we know, or we've seen things where, you know, you have T-maps or the transformation maps where actually you can talk about and present the views of the business outcomes that are trying to be achieved at the portfolio level. They're really useful as visual views. And yeah, depending on the maturity of the organisation and the portfolio management as a practice within it, the change community and how much you can embed and build that to get the insight about the business capacity, where the subject matter experts are and where you may have those hotspots of the same key resources that you need for multiple things within that plan. I think the other key call out, as you've already mentioned, is dependency management, or the interdependencies that you have, and they're crucial to keeping the optimum delivery timeline and schedule to achieve that value and those outcomes. If you take your eye off that ball, then things can become very quickly unstuck. And it seems like basics for project management and program management, but at the portfolio level, it can become very complex.
Yeah. No, I think that's absolutely spot on.
Yeah, I mean, from certainly a YBS perspective, a recent adoption we've had, which was very popular at a point in time, was the concept of air traffic control, so that you can gain insight on the other types of change, activity, or even repeatable business processes that happen that might disrupt delivery of that plan or create those resource contention points. So from my experience, that's a really useful case study, and it can work well in practice.
Yeah, I think the air traffic control concept is a really helpful one when you're thinking about the delivery assurance side. Absolutely spot on. You know, and it really helps you say, you know, what you're not trying to do is replace the roles of the pilots, the people flying the projects and programs. What you are trying to do is make their lives easier by helping coordinate their journey, providing them with the support that only you can see from above. So if I would ask you to take sort of two things away from today's session, if you're going to go and look at sort of establishing your own portfolio management function, I think the really important first thing to do is say, well, actually, are you going to lead into the optimization side? Are you going to lead into the assurance side? Where do you think the most value is going to sit into? Is going to sit in terms of your organization? Oddly enough, the optimization side is often harder than the assurance side, because the optimization side so depends on a very clear understanding of value, which can be quite hard to get at. So without a very clear understanding of value, it's very hard to do the optimization side well. On the delivery assurance side, my absolute number one top tip would be, actually, if you're going to start anywhere, start with that dependency alignment. Often setting up a portfolio office is a bit of a circus. You have to get people excited, you have to build people's energy. And one way to do that is to do quick wins. And actually, probably the easiest quick win, in my opinion, is to look at the big projects and programs and to help build a dependency map from the portfolio level. And actually, at that first session, you can show that off. You're very quickly able to show value and show people where there are potential conflicts that they're going to come into in the sort of 3 to 6 to 9 month period. So great little quick win. So that would be my absolute top tip. So we've talked a bit about the why. We touched on the what, so the what being the portfolio optimization, the portfolio delivery. Let's have a little look at the how now. And the how's a little bit more of a complicated point, because as I alluded to at the beginning, I've never worked in more than two organizations that do portfolio management in the same way. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to share with you some of the classic hows that are out there. And between those, you can probably find something that feels right for you and your organization. So this image I've got up in front of you at the moment is the classic. So this is the management of portfolios symbol. The management of portfolios was the big initial, what was originally OGC way of delivering portfolios, and it aligned to MSP and it aligned to Prince2, and of course it was brought out by Steve Jenner and Craig Kilford. But only back in 2011, actually, when I started doing this presentation, I actually dropped Steve a note to say, when did you do that? Because it seemed to say 2011 on the internet, and I couldn't believe it was that recent. But believe it or not, it's only 9 years old now. Now, there's something really interesting about this that I wanted to draw out. This is what we call a principle-based methodology. And what I mean by that is it majors on kind of ways of working, principles that you want to try and implement and embed, as opposed to deep focused methodologies, as you would see with something like Prince2. I think that's because, as I say, so many organizations need to do this in slightly different ways. So the best way to allow people to find what's right for them is you talk in high level terms about what they should be trying to do and let them build out the lower level points. I like this approach. I think it actually adds an awful lot for a lot of organizations. The 5 really key principles are senior management commitment, governance alignment, so clearly aligned with the organizational governance, strategy alignment, so aligned with the strategy of the organization, a portfolio office to help coordinate, and of course an energized culture. And those 2 things in the top left are quite interesting, senior management commitment and energized culture, because there are a number of different portfolio management methodologies. They all have slightly different approaches, but they all mention the importance of senior management commitment and having energy behind you. And without, well, senior management commitment specifically, your portfolio office is going to run out of steam pretty quickly. Without that backing, it's not going to get very far. So those 5 principles looped around this infinity sigil, which is kind of the fact that portfolio management goes on forever because it's linked to the permanent organization, driven by energy. And with those 2 important aspects of portfolio management, the definition side, which is what I think is that optimization stuff, and the delivery side, which is obviously making sure this thing is moving along correctly and you're doing your best to minimize the risk of delivery. So MOP is a classic, great read. There's a lot in there. Highly recommended as a place to start. Petula, have you guys used MOP up at Yorkshire, or have you used something different?
Yeah, we've used the principles of that, and I think they stand true in terms of our current setup as well. It has evolved over time, but yeah, we certainly remain true to that. I think for me, one of the key call outs is maintaining and establishing those links back to the strategy teams and that alignment. If you don't do that, then obviously it can become challenged. I think the other thing is that senior manager commitment. And from a portfolio management perspective, many may be familiar with a concept that's debated now, which is there actually a portfolio sponsor? Is that the right type of role to drive forward this type of portfolio management? Very similar to the old concepts and principles, but certainly in the body of knowledge and other reference materials, it's something that's getting increased focus and scrutiny. And certainly from my point of view, that's been a positive experience and something, you know, we have had in place at YBS.
No, that's great. And I think it's absolutely critical point, as you say. There's no point going anywhere with this without a strong sponsor fully behind you and pushing every step of the way, because it'll just not get anywhere, unfortunately. So management of portfolios, really good read if you get the chance. The next one I'm going to move on to is our own model. Now, this is the model you'll find in our guide, Portfolio Management, a Practical Guide, which I believe is now available on the APM website. Now, this is a process-based rather than a principle-based model. The point being about a process-based is basically saying, follow these steps to do the thing called portfolio management. And really what we focused on here is that really important link between the vision, the corporate strategy, something called a strategic plan, so important to, as some organizations call it a roadmap, but the thing that says that what is the journey this organization needs to be going on. Now that in turn allows you to build both your business as usual activity and your project activity, your portfolio, because actually the strategic plan tells you what you need to be changing of the business as usual. Once you've got that portfolio, you're really again trying to do two things. You're trying to assess that performance. So actually, how are we progressing to deliver the value? And you're attempting to manage the risk. Now we've pulled in the bottom there management of different delivery methods to develop, monitor, and control the portfolio. That really important word. How do you control that portfolio? All of that is ultimately about doing one thing, and that's delivering benefits into your organization to achieve the goals of that organization. Then of course that loops all the way back round, because as we all know, those strategic plans change often, and we begin the whole cycle over again. So this is less of a principle-based approach and more of a methodological step-by-step process-based approach to doing portfolio management. We're going to touch on the practical guide a bit later on, so I'm not going to say any more on this now, because as I say, we'll dig slightly into what sits around this a bit later on in the conversation. So we've looked at a principle-based, we've looked at a process-based. Now this is something from my own company. As I say, we do a lot of program management and portfolio offices, and what I really want to say was a service-based model. And what this model is doing is not saying these are the principles, it's not saying this are the steps, it's saying these are the things, these are the services that a customer of a portfolio function should and could be able to draw on. What this model is essentially trying to say is actually the portfolio offices, you're trying to do two things ultimately. You're trying to optimize that portfolio and you're looking to deliver that portfolio, and ultimately you're trying to give leadership to the portfolio. We use a very specific term around leadership. Leadership is really about how do you enable decision making at all levels of your organization around that optimization and around that delivery activity. And all of that is done through something we call the engine room being all the processes and activities that deliver the services to ultimately deliver those value through optimization and delivery. In terms of those services, we'd be sitting there and saying, well, actually, you've potentially got 12 services you can offer, 6 of those on the optimization side and 6 of those on the delivery side. On the optimization side, you'd be saying that you want to be able to align to strategy, you need to be able to tracking your benefits, you need to be doing stage, weight, and quality reviews to actually check your benefits are on track. You'll be able to manage your risks and issues to ensure those benefits get over the line, optimizing the portfolio, and of course the reporting and the governance that fall out there. And on the delivery side, you need to be able to define what does good delivery looks like, what are the plans for my portfolio, where is the dependencies, that dependency word again, so important. Business implementation, so the dependencies into the business of the portfolio. Demand management, which really catches everything around the capability and the capacity of your change management pool. Finally, reporting and governance around that delivery. Now, what I would always say at this point is when you're looking at the services that a portfolio or a portfolio office can deliver, there's an awful lot that it could do. There's also an awful lot that it shouldn't do. And it's really important to have a look at that and say, well, where's the real value to my organization? If you're setting up a program management office, you can usually be pretty sure of the stuff it needs to do to make the customers happy. You know, it's all around risk and issue management, it's around planning, it's around resourcing, it's around coordination, and so on and so forth, and give you 2 or 3 months and you can get something pretty high standard set up. Portfolio office is very, very different. And as I say, every single organization has a different take on what portfolio management means to them. So the services that underpin that have to vary dependent on that need. And you should be comfortable looking at something like that and saying, well, actually, I don't need a particularly strong stage gate approach, but I do need a really good business implementation service. And that's where we're really going to focus. So this would be what I'd call a service-based model, which defines the services that that portfolio function should be looking to deliver. Petula, you sit on top of quite a big portfolio function. You know, what services do you guys tend to offer for your customers?
We offer the standard things that you've just very eloquently outlined, and we have recently changed our approach to provide more of a service-orientated approach to what we're doing. I think one of the key things I would call out of your walkthrough of the different approaches is that you really need to find the approach that works best for your organisation. I think very much like the portfolio itself, you probably need to evolve, you know, to what's happening, be it the maturity of the organisation, or you know, depending on its maturity, you know, go for the service-based approach. If you, I would say, probably a more mature, and something more process-based, probably if you're starting up and you need something more clear. But again, it's linking into those needs and seeing if that fits with the organisation. To just plonk a model in won't work, and I do think you need to do some adaptation to make it fit.
We use the word need there very critically. You know, actually sponsorship is so important when you're landing a portfolio office, and if you aren't pleasing the sponsor, if you aren't pleasing your customers, if your customers aren't getting a good service, you will very quickly lose energy, you'll very quickly lose engagement, and very quickly the sort of the energy and the lifeblood you need to keep driving forward a portfolio engagement just stops. So, you know, absolutely, I couldn't agree more with you two. It's all about understanding what your customers, what your sponsors, what their need is, and making sure you're giving it to them in spades. So we've looked at 3 models so far, all fairly standard portfolio management models. We're going to look at 2 slightly more out there models now, if that's okay. So firstly, I was going to look at the SAFe version 5.0 lean portfolio management model. Now, I'm sure many people on this call have worked in the world of Agile. It's terribly popular. And in fact, believe it or not, it actually predates program management offices and portfolio management offices. I discovered the other day when I was doing a bit of a trawl through the history of these things. So it's been around for an awful long time, but there's always been something of a debate, I feel, around whether the worlds of Agile and the worlds of portfolio management actually sort of can work together sensibly, mainly because Agile is all about putting the power around what value looks like as close to the delivery engine as it possibly could, and portfolio management is really about saying that value needs to be defined at the C-suite and then controlled at the portfolio level. There's always been a bit of a kind of, in my opinion, there's a bit of back and forth between the Agile worlds and the portfolio management world, at least if you jump back kind of 5-10 years. So much so that actually we in the APM SIG, we run what we call Portfolio Directors Dinners series, and that's basically where we take a load of portfolio directors out and we ask a hard question. The very first one of these we ran was one called, is there such a thing as a lean Agile portfolio? And it led to a really fascinating 3-hour discussion over whether portfolio management and Agile worked in the same worlds. And you could actually probably split the community down the middle into those who said they do, but you know, actually portfolio management doesn't change. It doesn't matter if people are doing Agile. You're just defining what value looks like at the portfolio level and authorizing funding. And the community says it absolutely has to change fundamentally. The community who said it absolutely has to change fundamentally tended to be ones who had some familiarity with scaled Agile. Scaled Agile, of course, when you look at how you take a series of individual Agile teams and scale them, so you have all different Agile teams working to deliver organizational-wide transformations. Now, there's a number of methodologies you can use for this, I should say. Less is very popular. The one I'm particularly familiar with is one called SAFe, so the Scaled Agile framework by the Scaled Agile community group. SAFe actually specifically defines something called lean portfolio management, and actually that's what you can see on the screen here. You know, it would take a good hour to work through this, but there are some really interesting things I'd like to take away for you. They fundamentally say that the enterprise strategy needs to link into the portfolio of change. They're fundamentally saying that you do need to maintain a portfolio vision and roadmap. So at that portfolio level, at the C-suite level, somebody needs to be saying, this is the general direction the organization is moving in, and this is essentially what those big value points on that journey are going to be doing. They are very keen on there being that centralized management of funds, so they call it lean budgets and guardrails. What that basically means is that you should be at the portfolio level, be defining what value looks like and putting in place tolerances. So within this space, within this tolerance, the agile teams, the agile release trains can do as much as they want as long as they're aligned to value. If they go outside this level, we've got a problem. And they also talk about lean budgets and lean budget coordination, where actually you get all the various business owners together and force them to essentially have a conversation about where value should sit in the organization and what money should be spent on. So very, very committed to this idea of lean budgets and guardrails. And finally, establishing portfolio flow. Anyone who knows anything about scaled agile, they talk an awful lot about flow. And that's really about making sure you have visibility of how value is flowing through the organization, both at the agile level, at the agile release train level, and at that portfolio organizational level. So that's a very, very rapid canter through what's actually a very interesting and large scale area. Petula, I know you guys have been wrestling with agile. Anything you wanted to throw in there?
Yeah, I mean, like most organisations, the adoption of a more agile portfolio has been a bit of a head scratcher for the past year or so. Certainly at YBS, we've looked to introduce what's called a bimodal portfolio. So that's running a more traditional portfolio, more of a waterfall approach for those of you who are aware of it, alongside the agile initiatives. And that does pose its own challenges in terms of the way you organise the resources, the way you govern them, and providing the right level of reporting up to the C-suite. In a traditional portfolio, you've got the governance controls and delivery lines that are the experience of a lot of the senior leaders and C-suite. When it comes to agile, which we're adopting to become more digital, it's less well known, and in actual fact it can drive more scrutiny in terms of the progress and the reporting that's required. So it does create a challenge, and we're wrestling with it and making good progress. I think some of it is trial and error. And just harking back to the previous comments around doing what's right for the organisation and adapting where you need to. So adopting an out-and-out methodology without the buy-in, without understanding how you can tailor and make it fit the principles of portfolio management, because fundamentally the principles are the same around the governance, the control and the funding. They are just the same. The steps along the way might be slightly different. That's our experience.
Great stuff. So, I mean, there's an awful lot under here. And actually, if you want to learn a bit more, actually, you can go to the APM Portfolio SIG page, and you'll find the thought piece around the Lean Agile portfolio. So there's one final model I wanted to share with you. And actually, this isn't a portfolio model at all, but quite interestingly, there's been quite a recent movement to move away from this idea that there's a split. There's a split between the business as usual world and the transformation world, and actually that's been driven actually an awful lot by the agile world. But in some ways, you know, we have created this split between the business as usual and the fact that we need to change the business. If you go to certain project-based organizations, they don't really have a business as usual. They have just lines of products that are continually changing. What I've stuck up in front of you here is a model created by a guy called Geoffrey Moore. Geoffrey Moore, you may know, is the chap who wrote Crossing the Chasm, which is a great book about how you scale innovative ideas from a sort of early adopter phase to try and cross the chasm to make it sort of popular in the community. Geoffrey Moore's written a whole range of books, and he's really interesting, a really good writer, one of the very few business writers who are very engageable. His book Zone to Win basically talks about how you should be zoning your organization to understand what's the different stuff going on in all the different parts of the organization and how you should reward and how you should structure those. So for instance, the performance zone is essentially where you're making your money with your products. The productivity zone is what we probably think of as small projects to actually continually improve the performance rather than optimize it. Incubation zone is where you kind of come up with new ideas and you start to kind of incubate your innovative concepts. And the transformation zone is where you've got your one or two big idea that's going to either fight off a disruptor or turn you into the next big disruptor. And his point is transformation is big and scary and horrible. You do not want to be doing a big transformation zone activity more than once every 5 years or so, because that will just crush the organization. But as you say, this model ignores that kind of BAU world versus change world and basically says, look, is this a performance thing? Is it a productivity thing? Is it a new idea thing? Or is it a transformation thing? And you should be either focusing on performance zone or focusing on transformation zone. I think it's a really interesting book, worth a read if you've got a chance. But as I say, there's some really interesting thinking nowadays which says, let's not think about the portfolio and the project and the BAU world as different things. Let's think about how we can treat it all as one big organization and work out how change occurs across those different aspects of that organization. So we're coming to the end of our time now. We've talked a little bit about the why, we've talked about the what, that concept of optimization and assurance. We've looked at a few models of how: a principles-based, a methodological-based, a service-based, scaled agile, and finally this final model that doesn't really look at portfolio management. Just to finish off my little bit, I thought I'd share with you my top 3 recommendations around trying to implement a new portfolio solution. And these have actually been pulled from our book, Portfolio Management Practitioner's Guide. So the 3 I always trot off are absolutely the #1 thing you need to be doing is whenever you're trying to implement a new portfolio office is demonstrate the value of it. Treat your portfolio management activity as a project in itself, as a project of continuous improvement, and be very, very comfortable about always trying to show the value of each new improvement against some really key metrics. Otherwise, people will lose focus, they won't want to engage, and you'll lose that energy that drives you forward. You really have to be consistent and fair across the portfolio, irrespective of individuals. Now, that is far, far easier said than done, and there is no algorithm for value, cost, and risk that will ever beat a CEO telling you that his project is going to go forward, her project is going to go forward. But you need to have rules, and you need to try and apply them correctly. Otherwise, people will very quickly lose faith in your ability to be that honest broker. And finally, I'd say prioritize strategic goals clearly and build them into an ambiguous portfolio row. So absolutely, what are the goals of my portfolio? What are those strategic goals? They should be basis for decisions affecting the portfolio. There needs to be a reasonable balance between high, medium, and low projects, so you can actually balance between the 3. Try to be prepared to give precedence to critical activity on low priority projects over less important activity on higher priority projects. Really, that's about saying be pragmatic around a series of sensible strategic goals. Petula, what's your top recommendation?
Well, there's quite a few, but for me, I think it's gaining that engagement with your senior stakeholders, having that in to have the escalation point, have the backing, and get the insight and knowledge that you need to help inform what you're presenting, the audience you're presenting to, and the challenges that they will perhaps have in dealing with and managing the portfolio at that level. Often you can get stuck in the detail and focused on it from a very particular lens, and sometimes you need to lift your head out from that. In terms of focus areas, I think one of the things we touched on earlier is try to make sure that you are consistent in what you do, and as you've called out, and be that honest broker. Make sure that you are there to support the projects and programs, on the one hand, in the way they run their delivery plans and the advice and support you can give. And equally, you know, in achieving of the strategic goals and ambitions, let's not forget there's hard cash and investment being made here, and you know, we need to deliver on those outcomes. The concept from a practical and more operational management point of view, the air traffic control concept, I think, is really good and does bring that visualization to life for many about where the areas and responsibilities actually lie.
Absolutely. Great stuff. Well, we've got about 3 minutes left.
Just take a couple of questions. One is from Scott. Is portfolio management a replacement or should it run alongside program management?
Oh gosh, definitely run alongside, I think. Now, what would you say?
Yeah, I agree. I think depending on the size of organisation, there's often confusion and it gets clouded, you know, program management, portfolio management. If it's a large-scale organisation and it's a large program, people often mistake a lot of the similarities and differences that we've actually called out earlier in the presentation, and don't actually see a difference between program and portfolio management. So absolutely, it should be part of portfolio management. We've got another question from David. He has had experience of prioritising successfully within functions or business areas, but has actually struggled to achieve that across those different functions and business areas. I think a bit of advice is being sought there.
So if you're able to do it in function, then you know it's not ideal, but you can certainly create mini portfolios. So you can certainly say, okay, we're gonna look at what value means to this business area, and we're going to prioritize within this business area, and we'll allow whoever runs that business area to be essentially the sponsor of that activity. Now, if you've got a series of different business areas who are all doing that, you clearly have to make sure there is an element of coordination, but that can be as simple as at the higher level agreeing kind of what value looks like, agreeing how much transformation spend can be spent in each individual area, and agreeing, essentially rubber stamping the business case. Once you've established that this concept works, then actually you can move into try and bringing it all into one place. But if you're really getting pushback, you know, you can do it at the business level.
Absolutely, yeah. Okay, sorry we haven't got time for further questions. We are really close to running out of our allotted time, so thank you for bearing with us. We are representing and co-chairs of the Portfolio Management SIG, and we are active in what we do. And at the moment, it is nomination time for memberships if you're interested in joining. Part of what we've actually achieved and delivered, obviously we've talked about the guide, which was a little while in the drafting and making, but is available and out there for you. And we're really active in what we do. We deliver and present an annual conference. Hopefully some of you will have been and attended in the past. If not, fingers crossed and current circumstances permitting, we will be proceeding with another conference in the near future. So if you are interested in joining us or participating, please feel free to get in touch with us. We're interested in getting new members and sharing experiences, real life experiences at occasions such as this. One ask is the APM have asked me to just call out and remind people there's some APM modules available to you which are free as well at the moment, available if you're an associate and above for you to join in and participate on.
Just thanks for joining us. We'll look forward to talking later. Do feel free to hook me up on LinkedIn. It's Adam Skinner at P2 Consulting. As you can tell, I do love to talk about this stuff.
That's great. Thank you very much for your time and participation.